end of the day, you want the same experience as with the gas vehicle. You go to a gas station and you fuel up, you know how much it's going to cost. Same thing with an EV infrastructure, having less friction, but really knowing what that pricing is and knowing that
Mhm.
I'm going to be able to charge when I get there.
Yeah, it'd be lovely to have posted pricing for EVs. Yeah, I know. Have not
Yeah.
seen that yet, and I'd love to see it.
Well, it's because it's regulated. It's against the law to advertise what the what the price you are actually paying in the same way we do for gasoline.
Really? I
Really,
did not know that.
regulated utility.
Ah, that is fascinating. You've heard a lot about electric vehicles. Here's a twist you probably didn't see coming. Georgia, right here in the South, is leading the country in EV manufacturing investment. From the factory floor to your driveway, we'll connect the dots between innovation, industry, and everyday life. Let's get into it. Welcome back to our conversation with Jonathan Smoke, Chief Strategy Officer at Cox Automotive, and Stephanie Valdez Streaty, Director, Industry Insights at Cox Automotive. If you haven't listened to part one of this conversation, I recommend you listen to it first before continuing this episode. Last episode, we did a deep dive into the used EV market, EV infrastructure, and their roles as innovators in the electric vehicle and future mobility industry. Related to a lot of the things that you guys have both pointed out, what needs to happen to stabilize consumer confidence in used EVs and EVs in general? What do you think is most important? Is it pricing, battery transparency, warranties, charging reliability, some combination of the above?
Yeah, I think it's they all matter, right? I think definitely the price is right? When you think about getting to price parity in our latest data point, it was about $1,300 difference between a used EV and a used gas vehicle. And actually, I think maybe it was September, sometime last year, the difference was like $750. So I think that is just a very attractive, right, for getting somebody. But I think the battery, I mean, in our studies that we do, it's always price, but also battery, right? Like consumers have concern about what happens if this battery dies, we'll have to replace it. So I think having trust and confidence about the health of the battery, which Gabby, you know that we tested our auctions. And so we're gathering a lot of good data on this. So I think that's going to be important to have that. But the other thing I think with used EVs is knowing that there's a warranty, a battery warranty. In our survey, I think it was 29% of respondents knew that there was a battery warranty. And if they knew there was one, like consideration grew up to like 80%. So I say all that to say there's a huge education piece around this, around the battery life, how to charge, how to take care of your battery, how to optimize that battery life. All that's going to be important to really kind of grow that market.
Definitely. Anything you want to add to that, Jonathan?
I mean, the answer is yes, and that's where again why you reach what we see is when markets and be it a state, a county, a zip code, when you reach a tipping point that a certain number of EVs are in operation, you have educated people because their friends and family are demonstrating it in front of them, and it's not a foreign concept. And the more that we have in operation, we benefit from having facts and details. And frankly, one positive of losing the IRA and the tax credits is that we believe the outlook for used EV pricing is very likely to be far more stable going forward because you no longer have pressure. The tax credits basically discount the vehicle from its sticker before you drive off the lot. And now we no longer have that effect. And we think that that's going to make people feel more comfortable because, frankly, how vehicles hold their value influence consumers. And today it's sending the wrong message when actually what we've seen from the testing that Stephanie mentioned that we do is that the batteries are performing better than people were expecting, not worse. So it really isn't a concern for the vehicle. So it adds to my optimism of how some people are saying that large increase in the used EVs that Stephanie mentioned could be creating a problem. It's a drop in the bucket. We think there's plenty of demand, and we actually think it's going to be better because something we haven't talked about so far is who sells used EVs and who is going to increasingly be selling the new EVs that are being offered? Traditional dealers. And up until now, dealers haven't played as much of a big role. When the market was dominated by Tesla, that was decidedly against the framework of how the average consumer thinks about going for expertise and where they actually source a new or used vehicle. And dealers are increasingly embracing EVs. I saw more optimism about the used EV market at the NADA convention than I have ever seen in terms of optimism. And if the dealers are behind it, then it's another factor that makes me feel positive that the industry is going to be able to absorb these vehicles and extend them to more people, educating more people as a result, and we continue to see, moving in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting with the leases, especially because a lot of the reason why people were buying EVs on leases was that they were concerned about, oh, what if a new EV comes in 2 years that has much better range? So the kind of some of that optionality there. But yes, I've been tracking a lot of what you guys have been publishing on the battery health and how the battery health is really exceeding expectations, which is a really good outlook for folks who are worried about a degrading vehicle battery over time, which is really much less of a concern than we all thought it was going to be. Um, Last question on used EVs, very related to what you were just saying, Jonathan, with the dealerships. How are residual values evolving, and how much does infrastructure perception factor in?
Yeah, I think luckily at our auctions, we have a lot of data and we're seeing a lot. We have data on depreciation, and I just call out a few data points that I got from our team. We're looking at the average annual depreciation rates for a 1-year-old is 18%, 2-year-old 17.2, and a 3-year-old 15.2. And ICE vehicles depreciate at about 15 to 20% annually. So EVs are now within that. I think EVs early on depreciate faster, but then that's starting to stabilize. And I think
That's been with the tax credit.
with the tax credit, right, right. And I think the other thing though is we start to go further along, get more and more, as I mentioned, more and more data in our auctions on these EVs. I think we'll have really more confidence in what's that depreciation schedule. Um, and knowing the battery health once again is going to be important. And we actually, it's called an MMR adjustment. And Jonathan, you probably can speak to this more intelligently than I can, but our team is working on having an adjustment. So based on, you have a car, its value is based on all the things that you could imagine, right? The external, the internal stuff. And then the battery is going to have an adjustment too, based on the health of that battery, the score. So that could either add or decrease the value of that vehicle. So over time, that could be more and more important, especially as we start to see older models enter the auction.
Yeah, battery health matters more to the inherent value, the residual value of a used EV than mileage does. And the market needs to
Mhm.
have those facts in order to be able to see that influenced in the way vehicles are bought and sold. But we're right on the cusp of seeing that come to fruition.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
that. Oh, sorry, go
oh,
ahead,
the only
Stephanie.
other thing I was going to add, and I know this is, the California waiver was revoked, but there was regulations that, OEMs would be required to put the state of health on the dashboard. And so that's kind of in flux right now. Not sure where that's going to go, but I think that's where the industry needs to get to standardization, right? Kind of like we've had a standardization for the North American charging standard. I think that is helping consumers, right, have a better user experience when they charge. So similar with battery, I think that's the direction we'll end up going. And as Jonathan mentioned, we can look at our European counterparts to see kind of what they're doing there to create more of that standardization around battery health.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a really important standardization point I wasn't tracking, and it's really fascinating to me because yes, we still kind of judge a lot of value for vehicles universally ac across the odometer rating, but for battery based vehicles, it would be the state of health of the battery because you're not really doing much maintenance on the rest of the car. Love that point. That's great. Product market fit is where we're going next. I often break EV performance into three buckets, right? Price sensitivity, vehicle identity, and preference, as well as a little bit of infrastructure trust and range anxiety for good measure. From your data, which variable is most influential today in 2026?
I mean, definitely price, right? You definitely have, we have lots of data to show what happens when prices go up, when incentives are added, how that impacts volume of those vehicles. So I think that's something easy to measure. I think the one area I feel like that's hard to measure is vehicle in terms of preference, right? Like
Mhm.
why would Gabby want to buy a, Taycan versus a Mach-E, like, or whatever, like, what are those preferences? I think that's hard to really judge. And I think at the end of the day, it's having compelling products that resonate. But I think that's really hard I haven't really found anything that shows really good data on how you judge how a person's going to gravitate towards a certain EV model or segment.
Yeah, the follow-up question to that for both of you is, do you think that we as an industry are underestimating the behavioral component, which is kind of what you're describing, of product market fit?
I I think so. I think if you think about like we've had in 2020 like 16, 17 EV models, right? Now we have close to 70. So we
Mhm.
have models in each of the segments, but we need more options. So if you're an ice buyer, I want a SUV, a compact, or I want a midsize or whatever, right? Segment, you have lots of options. Not so much with the BEV. So I think that's kind
Mhm.
of where we need to go, right? Having more compelling options in all those different segments, different price points. Once again, providing options for consumers.
I think
Yeah.
that's fair. Oh,
And
go
early
ahead,
adoption has
Jonathan.
been disproportionately to very high income consumers that have multiple vehicles in their household. It helps to ensure that they're not trying to use an EV for a use case that isn't optimal. And I think that, to get to broader adoption, there's no question you have to have lower price points and more configurations. And one of the sad effects of the bandwagon approach to EVs in recent years is that we pushed too much direction in actual form factors that didn't make sense. Big, heavy vehicles that were super expensive in order to have the battery capability that it only added to their weight and added to other problems when we would have been far more successful if we had a 30,000 or sub $30,000 vehicle that really spoke to the economics of the average American driver. And I think we're going to see the market shifting more aggressively. We hear Ford talking about trying to get to that $30,000 pickup truck, and I think that would be a huge deal because it would probably be a much better match for what the consumer is really seeking.
I
Yeah,
agree. This
I was
this one is,
gonna,
oh, go ahead, Stephanie.
oh no, I was just going to point out that the whole option in our data, we're looking at just the price points. 60% of the EV models are over $65,000. So just to
Wow.
point out, right, in terms of
Yeah.
option, and so that just gives like lots of opportunity to have more models in that more affordable um, ATP range.
Definitely. The only thing I'll add to what both of you have already said is that this is something I talk about a lot because I look at where the rest of the world is in a lot of the call them more mature or largest EV markets globally. They have closer to 400 to 500 options on the EV side. And that's kind of the level of market and ecosystem maturity that we're going to have to get to at some point for people to feel like their EVs on the market for them, both in terms of affordability, but also just form factors and options as well, which is really fascinating. And I agree with you, Jonathan, that like a lot of the early EVs were really early adopter EVs, which is, I have the extra money for this. I'm really excited about this like very
Yeah,
flashy,
and think
expensive
further about
EV.
the early EVs. They were concentrated in California and the West Coast, so a lot of Americans had zero exposure to them. across, middle America, for sure. And then they were also sold through totally different channels. And by the way, the surge in leasing of EVs, which has definitely been a portion of the growth in the market. Well, leasing is an exotic concept that, frankly, the folks in the Bible Belt don't really like. So, there's just all kinds of complications that the future where you're more likely to have um, less expensive options. You're going to have more choice in traditional brands. You're gonna have, at least through the used vehicle market, more of these vehicles being offered in states that didn't see them before. That you're going to have a lot more exposure and a lot greater probability of really determining what the consumer preference is. Because I would argue we haven't remotely come close to tapping into it. And there's far more opportunity out there than we've actually realized.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I think there's definitely an EV out there for everybody.
You have
That
more than one vehicle and can charge at home.
precisely,
But just
precisely.
limiting to that world and only replacing one of those vehicles in the household is 65 million vehicles. That's an enormous growth potential.
Truly, truly. And honestly, if we figure out the infrastructure right for mainstream adopters, especially those who can't charge at home, which is kind of what I've been focused on the charging infrastructure roadmap side, I think we also have a real opportunity for the folks who are buying used EVs to also be able to affordably charge them publicly if we figure out some
Well,
of
that's right.
the
You get that
missing
charging
middle.
infrastructure, then you
That's huge.
unlock the people who don't have the ability to charge at home.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, talking about infrastructure pricing as well as competitive positioning in general, I have a couple of questions there related to what we just said. If charging reliability materially improved nationwide, do you think demand would respond immediately or more gradually?
Yeah, I think it'll be more gradual, right? I mean, I think there's this whole perception, reality. I think, and Gabby, you know this, you're expert in this space, but we've had a lot of growth in infrastructure. Reliability has been an issue. We started to see that change now that, we've seen like the consumers have an experience with the Tesla superchargers, right? Which tend to have more reliability. And I think one thing that we've talked about, I think the real thing that we need is that real-time data, right? So when I'm going to a charging station, I know for sure that it's operational. I know how many people are in queue. The other thing I think that needs to really happen around infrastructure is the transparency around pricing. You go to a gas station. I guess at the end of the day, you want the same experience as with the gas vehicle. You go to a gas station, you fuel up, you know how much it's going to cost. Same thing with an EV infrastructure, having less friction, but really knowing what that pricing is and knowing that
Mhm.
I'm going to be able to charge when I get there.
Yeah, it'd be lovely to have posted pricing for EVs in the same way that you have posted pricing for gas stations. Yeah, I know. Have
Yeah.
not seen that yet, and I'd love to see it.
Well, it's because it's regulated. It's against the law to advertise what the what the price you are actually paying in the same way we do for gasoline.
Really? I
Really,
did not know that.
regulated utility.
Ah, that is
That is,
fascinating.
the other thing that's interesting too, I was on a call yesterday. It was UC Davis has done a study, and they were saying that a large, I don't know what percentage, maybe 30% of the people using the fast charger, it was free because of the OEM or whatever free package they got. So that's another
Right.
interesting thing too, that when I think about total cost of ownership, in the near term, you might have, like a couple of years of free charging, which I
It's
think
true.
kind of it could be a really good selling point.
There is a lot of free or cheap charging that is subsidized in some way by
Right.
various folks. Sometimes it's like government offices that want to offer free charging, etc. This is true in the interim. Last question in this competitive positioning section. As hybrids gain share and EV growth normalizes, how should the US industry be thinking about positioning over the next 5 years?
Just options for consumers, right? Being able to have different options depending where they are on this journey of a full electrification, whether it's a hybrid, plug-in hybrid, EREV, just being able to have that approach. But I think part of that is education. I think consumers are confused. What's a hybrid? What's like, do I need to plug in a gas hybrid? Do I need to charge it? So I think this whole education piece is something the industry continues to really need to make more robust, either at the dealership level, at the OEM level, all stakeholders involved. I think that's something that's going to be really much needed as we go through this transition and have different hybrid alternatives offered to consumers, really knowing what that is and how does it fit into my lifestyle, and really kind of showing the value proposition for each of those.
Yeah, I agree. It's a lot of choice and it's education. It's an interesting, we haven't talked about this topic yet on this call, but could this be something that AI tools helping consumers navigate the complexity of what's the best vehicle for them really helps in this? Because the optimal situation is a whole series of, well, how do you use your vehicle? How far do you drive in a typical day? Do you live where you can charge at home? You've got this whole laundry list, and dealers haven't been selling EVs enough, and especially having a product portfolio that includes hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and EVs to be in a position to really logically walk people through. And oh, by the way, how does that impact your insurance and your maintenance costs to really get a true understanding of total cost of ownership? And I think AI is going to be revolutionizing how we navigate the world, and we're using Chat GBT or Claude or Gemini to essentially say, hey, what's the best vehicle for me? And I think that's one way to get through this complexity, because it's sort of like being told go pick the optimal cereal at the grocery store, or worse, breakfast food item, and you walk down that aisle. And I've been told stories back when the Soviet Union fell apart, and like a Soviet came to America and literally like had a panic attack going to a grocery store because there was so much choice. Um, that's the downside of our world. This is a lot of choice, and there is truly something that's a better fit for somebody. And it could be a hybrid, it could be a plug-in hybrid, it could be an EV. And until you have a way to navigate all of that, people just sort of stumble through that process. And I think AI offers a lot for us.
That's a great idea, Jonathan, because you think about people, especially EV considerers, go online, do a lot of research, but able to have that to navigate the different options. And then as a dealer tool, when there's so much turnover in sales staff.
Yeah.
Oh no, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a great like mini company idea. Love to see it. I've gotten a lot of questions on my end of friends trying to navigate whether they should buy or an EV or a hybrid, and I've done that physically for people. It's a good idea to make that just kind of a chat bot app of
Mhm.
some sort. So a couple of closing questions for you both. If you had to identify one leading indicator to watch this year or for the next 5 to 10 years to understand the US EV market trajectory, what would it be?
I think for me, we talk about all these new models launching, the Toyota Subaru have some really good products launching. Just watching these more affordable EVs, do they resonate with consumers? What's the volume? I mean, could any of them have a Model Y moment? That would be huge. So watching that,
True.
and then definitely the used market as well.
Yeah, those are my exact two that I would say. Let's see how well those product launches are doing, and then let's see how the used EVs coming back from the off-lease units in particular, how they're being absorbed. And we're optimistic that both are gonna have a fine year.
Great. And then the last question, which might be related to everything we've already said, but just to wrap us up, in 5 to 10 years, where do you hope the US market will be, and what current messy transition issues do we hope that we've collectively resolved as an industry by then?
I can start with that. So I go back to the beginning of our conversation with the supply chain. So I think building up the supply chain, because that really ties to vertical integration, helping for vertical integration, reduce price, right? To be able to build these EVs at a lower price due to economies of scale, battery prices going down, right? I think that's going to be important. I think building trust in the vehicles, like that they're not going to catch on fire, Gabby, and I know you have data on that.
I do.
I have trust that the charging station is going to work, trust that the battery's not going to die. And then I think lastly, just policy. Like we all know there's been so much change in policy. And, as we've talked about the 22 vehicles launching, manufacturers can't pivot that quickly, right? They do long-term planning. And so I think, and they're navigating these policy shifts, but I think just having more certainty, I think that's going to be really helpful for the industry.
Yeah, and I think that trust component is huge. And 5 years from now, the strength of the used car market, the facts that we know about battery performance, and how that then subsequently reinforces financing options, warranties, and the like that really help to address some of the concerns or anxieties that are in the marketplace. I think we're in a totally different world. And I would expect that back to the battery belt, it's good news for the Southerners listening in on this, because hopefully we're contributing to the growth in all the aspects.
Definitely. Stephanie, Jonathan, this has been an incredibly valuable conversation. Um, Thanks for discussing on how a non-linear once in a generation transition plays out, markets mature, and that they don't collapse every time growth slows. The next phase of EV adoption will likely be defined less by hype and more by trust, affordability, charging performance, and used market stabilization. Thank you both for helping us cut through some of the headline noise. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. We'll continue tracking how the EV and battery markets evolve across the battery belt and beyond. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Battery Belt podcast. Be sure to follow us for more on how the American Southeast Battery Belt is shaping electric vehicle and future mobility, innovation, industry, and everyday life.